Okay, so we've got the recording running, and good. So good morning, everybody, and welcome back to day 3 of the TCoffeeAndCode. My name's Stephen Ball. I'm going to be hosting today. So these sessions are very much live. We're not terribly scripted for these. We've got a few slides just to help with the conversation and to set some of the scene around the topics that we've been talking around. If you have webcams and you want to turn them on, then it's always nice to be able to see different people's faces and just make this more of a community feel than the normal general webinar. The chat is available, so please go ahead and put any questions into the chat as we're going through. We will be interacting as much as we can with the chat as we go through the session in real time. So please go ahead and use that. I hope you continue enjoying the format. We've been having a lot of good feedback on this, so hopefully something we can continue on in the future. So today's session, we're joined by Daniele Teti, who is the CEO and the CTO of BitTimeProfessionals in Italy. They operate worldwide, specializing in software design, development, training, and machine learning. Danielle is pretty well known. He's an MVP within the community. He's also the author of Delphi Studio. The CTO of Delphi Studio, which is BitTime's Spanish partner. I was thinking authoring. He's done a number of books, including the Delphi Cookbook series. He's kind of a software architect, trainer, book author, consultant, and obviously the lead for the Delphi MVC Framework, which is the leading GitHub repository for Delphi in terms of numbers. It's a very, very popular open source project, and we're going to find out a little bit more about that very quickly at the start today, just to set the scene so we can then talk around the management of open source projects and how they work. So lovely to have you on with us, Daniele. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi, guys.
So do you want to just share a little bit about the Delphi MVC framework and what it is and how it's kind of working?
Yes, the MVC framework is, as you told, is very popular Delphi framework, which provides an easy to use. I say that the MVC framework is really simple to use, at least at start, and it's to provide a complete solution for communication system, because it started as a full framework, but it's more than that now. It's scalable, flexible, support RESTful, which is on maturity model level 3. So support all the things that RESTful needs. The MVC framework support it. Provide an very interesting JSON RPC implementation for remote procedure code based on JSON, and a very thin layer over FireDuck, which implements an active record framework. Active record is a design partner to access data and to implement some kind of logic into your business entity, and allows also to expose directly entities directly on the REST API. So you have, for example, this is a scenario: you have a database, need to provide some kind of access to your table with grants, authorization, authentication, and so on. And you can just create your entities from the database, mapping your field table and so on, and implement your logic, and then expose the entities that you need directly with. It's a matter of minutes, let's say, to implement it. Also, strong community and a huge number of direct contributors, which allows the MVC framework to be what today is. Who use it? The MVC framework is used by more to very big companies in the world. Certainly, I don't know all the people, the companies that use the MVC framework, but sometimes gets help requests from very small software shop to very big company, and it used to handle 1,000 concurrent users per second. We'll see in a success case in a moment, and it's trusted by thousands of developers around the world.
Okay, so yeah, there's a couple of stories here just to kind of set the scene really around how it's being used. So you got this first one here with remote support.
Yes, this success case is really interesting because usually Delphi is mostly used to handle database data and so on, but the flexibility to have to base the MVC framework on Delphi allows, for example, to use the MVC framework also to create a software similar to TeamViewer, for example, for remote support. It's really popular, this software, because it needs to handle something like million of connection per month. And the MVC framework is used for handling licensing, dispatching, messaging, managing all this huge amount of connection and user behind that connection, obviously. And the MVC framework, this success case is important because the MVC framework is based on Delphi technology. So it's based on WebBroker. WebBroker started from Delphi 4, if I remember correctly. And the good point that being based on WebBroker is that the MVC framework can be deployed as console application, as VC application, Firemark application, as Apache module for Linux, for Windows, as API DLL for Internet Information Server. And in this case, it's used as Apache module in a cluster of Linux servers. These server farms are located in Germany because it's almost at the center of the Western Europe, and in a state which is almost in the middle of the US. I don't remember correctly, but the location is was the same. And it handles, this cluster handles a huge amount of connection per hour, for minutes, and to support this remote support system.
Okay,
the next,
cool. Yeah, the next one's...
Yes, it's really cool. This case is more, let's say, normal, if we can say, because we are talking about a very large ERP developed by an Italian company, and this is installed in many Europe countries as well. Obviously, an ERP is really broad because I had to handle from the invoice to the factories to the billing, really any kind of thing a company and a factory needs to handle. And so there are 500 instances in a server farm, one for each customer. There are a lot of concurrent users in the working hour, obviously. And there is a big portal for the web-related stuff, and the big VCL client, the oldest one, let's say, which is fundamentally client server, but use a lot of API calls to the web server to handle common data or to communicate directly with the JavaScript client. That's it. This is the scenario.
Cool.
And in this case, the database obviously is enormous, is huge, very, very huge. This case is another product which is called DMS container, which is the, as far as I know, the first microservice container for Delphi. DMS container is a container based on Delphi and Python, and is able to load, handle, and operate a virtual infinite number of microservices. You just can drop your BPL there, and it works. And DMS container also provides a set of built-in services for the most common needs for any business-oriented developer. So sending mail, queues management, reporting, generating PDF file or Excel reporting, and so on. So DMS container is a product and a development environment, let's say, which provide an complete environment for microservice, for Delphi-based microservice and based microservice.
Very cool. And that's quite an interesting one, because we're going to talk about a number of the different things around kind of open source and the management of it, and how it works to benefit you as a developer as well, contributing into it. And we'll probably touch back on this one a little bit later in the conversation. So
yeah.
So good to see a number of people just saying hello and good morning. It's great to see that kind of community feel flowing through us in the chat. We're going to literally delve into now some of the stuff around the management and the why open source and all those kind of things. So we've got a few kind of guiding questions on the screen here. If there's other things that you want to ask, then please feel free just to put those in the chat. So we've had a quick introduction to the products and what they are and some stories behind them. So I guess the first question really, Danielle, is why open source? Why did you, obviously you started off with this project. Why did you push it to open source?
Long story short, because it works. It helps to spread the product and allows to provide services related to the primary product. Obviously, it is not the correct business model for all kind of things. We know this is not the panacea for all kind of problem related to the make money with software. It is not the only thing, but it works very well for some kind of general software after it reach a critical size. If no one use it, don't think to make money for it, obviously. For example, think to Apache product or Python or PostgreSQL. They are open source software, but generates income for many specialized companies and individuals, which orbital in their universe, in this universe of this product. However, as I told, open source can generate some money only if the product is very good and is widely used in community. Because if the concept is, if someone bet on your open source product today, then later maybe he could pay something for consultancy, training, specialized development, and so on. And for these kind of things, the MVC Framework is a very successful open source software. However, the money are not the driver for the open source, I think, at least for the MVC Framework. In fact, in the case of the MVC Framework, probably the direct money it generates for me or my company in the last 12 years are not sufficient to pay all the working on it. But I think that it works the job, because it is now the MVC Framework has a huge ecosystem around them. Many people use it. There are a lot of contributors, and sincerely, the MVC Framework will not reach the feature set and the request that today has if working on it was only my company. This is for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a, I know I did a postgrad in technology management and looking at different business models around bringing things to market. And the one thing around open source is always about looking at the downstream revenue for projects and the value. And the value, as you say, isn't always in terms of money. It's in terms of the maturity and the other things that come through that bring value back to you as well. And being able to pick up and get the best information that you can from lots of different companies out there about using products and feed those back in. It's great to get paid to add those in and prioritize them. But also it means that as you're using it yourself, as you say, it's working, and as you use it in other projects, you then find additional value coming back in from the great ideas that other people are having that then flow back into what you have, which is brilliant.
Yeah. I love this kind of communication between the lead developers, let's say, and the people who use them and can ask you for support, but give you some work, let's say, and together we can do a better thing than what you can do in a single way.
So when you started out with the Delphi MVC framework, what was the original driver to get it going, and when did you decide to push it to open source?
We decided to start the MVC framework because before we was using another libraries that really don't cope with our needs. And some needs really demanding for the time, but there is no the correct, let's say, framework to do it, and we start to do it. And we decided to make it as open source from the very first day because the aim of the project was very broad, and so creating a community to collaborate on it was critical. Was critical in the first place for us because as I many times I say, what are the key lesson? The key lesson I have learned about it. I think that in more than 12 years of work on the MVC framework, I learned a lot, technically and not technically. I saw, for example, yet another time how the peer review and the common intelligence are invaluable for not trivial project, because you cannot just stick the hand in the sand and start to write code that you think is the best solution for the problem, because probably all the solution is not in your head. So the first problem to solve is to correctly understand the problem and the possible solution approaches. And for these kind of things, a community behind an open source project is invaluable. Really, the MVC framework is a community-driven project, and I'm really happy to see it.
Cool. So once you decided to kind of get going with your project, I guess source code management, you obviously chose to use GitHub as a way to share that out. But obviously source code management goes a lot further beyond just somewhere to dump it.
Yeah.
So looking at kind of storage, merging, testing, build processes, how's that evolved over time, and what kind of software and bits have you got in place to help you with that?
I think that the MVC framework aims to support last 4 versions of Delphi, at least. And so sharing, testing, merging with different versions, different environment is critical. We use GitHub for all the service provided, so the Git, but also the issues, the release, and all what we can use about it. In terms of merge testing and building, we use different feature branch, the feature branch for all the major features. If it is a small fix, we can do directly in the master. But if there is some more important work, we just do a feature branch. And there is a completely automated build process, which builds all the artifacts, then run all the unit tests, all the integration tests, and then, if all is okay, produces all the packages for the release. Unit tests are fundamental for the MVC framework because no architecture is correct from the first time. From the first time you try to do it, and so you need to do refactoring, testing. I have to test this correct like this, is correct like that. So the unit test is the most important things probably in the MVC framework. And in terms of build process, the build process is handled by a Python task runner called PyInvoke, which is like more or less a glorified make or Maven or Ant in the Java land, and it's very handy. And as I say anytime in my trainings, the automation of tests and builds makes the difference between a software artisan and a software professional. And so the MVC framework cannot be the DMVC framework we know if there are no this kind of build process management and unit test integration test management. It's really, really important to have it, and it's really important to have it automated.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, we spoke on the Monday session at the end briefly about a link for some of the DevOps stuff around, and there's a lot of very good software and tools around, and actually there's quite a lot of good integration within the IDE for different stages and working through things. And obviously there's the unit testing for once things get pushed in, but also having those within your project, being able to use unit testing plugins. We spoke about some of those yesterday on the Open Tools API session. All these things help as a developer with the productivity and also kind of the management and working through projects, which is pretty cool. Okay, so I think just kind of linking back to the bit here about open source. I think Jason, got a question in here. There's a few of them within the UK developer group who are working on some code to help with the UK tax authorities for submitting bits in. And they're trying to work out how best to move that forward and what approach to take with it. So any advice that you could give them at the moment in terms of thoughts for how to kind of make sure that people who are contributing kind of get some value back from it, but also don't just kind of get their time sucked up by people who are not wanting to contribute in. I think, Jason, I'm more than happy to have a chat with that offline. There's some, hopefully you're getting some pointers from this today, but I think being able to kind of, if you're happy to make the source open, so you can get a wider group of people contributing into it, then that obviously gives the best way to move it forward. And then if there's people wanting to make changes or updates, having a group of core developers on it, then they can, in the way that Danielle has been talking about it, have contributions pushed in, or get paid by people to make the changes and to push the stuff in and to test it. And so getting a wider group of people interested in it is obviously good for what you're doing with that, but also good for Delphi and raises the profile of those who are working on it as well, which is good.
Good.
Okay. So Daniele, how do you prioritize future work from the ideas that you get coming in?
Probably this is one of the most challenging things in an open source project, because anyone wanted different things. One tried to do, I need this. And so there are mostly 4 drivers to prioritize the work. And there is no particular order, but it's just 4. I think that in the MVC framework, we use the community needs. So if the community start to ask for specific things, we try to understand if we can do it directly, if we need the support of someone else, if we need something volunteers to do it. But probably this is when the needs start from the community. After this, there are the BitTimeProfessionals needs. For example, if we need for a specific customer change an internal change or a new feature in the MVC framework, very often we work on the framework before to start the project for the customer, and then we release the upgrade to the MVC framework, and then start for the customer. And the other drivers for the prioritize the future work is where is going the market. Is the market going in some part? We start to investigate if we can do something in that field or not. And last but not least, simply what I like to do. This is also one of the drivers.
Yeah, well, absolutely. If investing time into a project, you've got to enjoy what you're doing, and
the MVC framework is very modular. So if you most of the time you can implement brand new feature without changing the core. So it is not a problem to implement a new feature and release it as a middleware, and nothing can be broken by that middleware because you have not changed the core. The solid principle, the open-close principle, no? The system must be open for extension, but closed for the modification. The MVC framework is really open for the extension because you have hooks for the request, you have the middlewares, you can implement as I told, the hooks for the request, you can implement the action filter, the middlewares, the of the middlewares, you can implement only management for the request in some ways. It's really, really, really flexible. In fact, some of the last features has been implemented without touching the core. Really, without touching the core, just implement this middleware, use this middleware, and you have the new feature, which is the same mechanism used also for other similar framework, for example, in Python or in Node.js, to use this kind of middleware. Okay, so you can plug the feature that you need without a huge load of feature directly into the core, and you need to configure, to manage, and something. You just need to plug what you need, and it works.
So I guess that really helps having that design pattern when you have over 30 contributors who are tapping in and sharing and working with things, that they can implement things within a reasonable level of isolation without having wide impact on the rest of the product.
Yes, this is the most important thing. When you start to work with a project with a certain size, you can get lost if you don't have used, not because you are stupid, because the project, the complexity of the project, the question is that the most simple things is to make all complicated. This is the most simple things. So you need to be disciplined to apply design pattern, a correct architecture to make the complexity low, because otherwise you can simply get lost after some years of development. So it's very important: design pattern, architecture, solid principle, and all this clean architecture stuff.
So we've touched on a couple of them as we've gone through, but in terms of products that help you with the project and management of it, what's your kind of favorite tools that you're using, and other things that you've tried and or lessons that you've learned from using different products that have helped change what you're doing over time?
Into almost 12 years of development, we've switched from different, let's say, helping products. Obviously, Delphi is the most important, but there are different framework, different other open source projects we use internally. For example, we use a lot of JSON data objects from Andreas Ausladen, which is a JSON parser, really fast and really with a good feature set. All our unit and integration tests are implemented using the unit text, which is a piece of cake, really. It's a pleasure to work with. And as I told, we use Python to handle all the build management, all the DevOps operation to create the artifacts. And also inside the unit test, to make inside the unit text project for the integration test, we use also an instance of DLL for SQLite, for Hybrid SQL, and a complete instance of PostgreSQL to do all the tests related to the active record framework, to test all the stuff related to the database access. Inside the unit test, we create a brand new, not only a schema, a brand new database cluster. Each time you run the test, it's quite fast. It's quite fast on a good machine. And so our test is repeated always in the same way, always in the same way. Also, inside the MVC framework, being a big project, internally started other, let's say, smallest project to do a specific things. For example, this is the case of Logger Pro, which is a logging framework, which allows to plug different appender to log on the file, to log on the, for example, to a REST endpoint, to log on a Telegram chat, for example, and allows really to log everywhere. And you can use it started as a bunch of units inside the MVC framework, and then has been extracted and become a project, an external project, and is called Logger Pro, which is very, very useful, and you can use also without the MVC framework, obviously. It's not related to other project, and that we often use in the MVC project is the Delphi Redis client, for example, because the MVC framework allows to use cache, and this cache can be stored in memory or can be shared, for example, in a cluster of server, can be shared in a Redis server or a cluster of Redis server to cache, for example, the result of a query serialized, or a lot of other things that you can just stuff them into Redis and get back when the user asks for it. And so the MVC framework is really pluggable. I think it is the best word that can describe it. It's pluggable, just.
Okay, cool. You mentioned unit testing a few times, and also we have a session tomorrow is going to be focusing very much on unit testing. So a quick shout to Jens, who's going to be taking us through that. The way that you're implementing unit tests, obviously you've got the unit tests on the code, and you kind of mentioned kind of spinning up Docker instances and bits. Are you using kind of unit tests to do integration testing then as well? So testing the clients against the server, or how are you managing integration testing?
We use the unit testing as a unit testing, so testing the methods and the smallest part of code, and we use the unit tests also to do integration tests. So our tests are unit tests and integration tests. To long story short, into the unit tests project, I have some test suite that test the actual code. Okay, the actual code. So I create the class, I ask for a result and so on. But also in other tests, we create a REST client and issue some tests to a REST server, because in this way you can do integration and component testing for to close the circle for all the kind of tests. So we use one tool to do unit, component, and integration tests.
Cool. It shows the power of what we have in the box. So obviously you've mentioned the community that you have around the project. How do you find it, managing and working with a community? What kind of approaches are you using? I know you're using things like Facebook and other ways to communicate and work with them and so on.
Yes. There is the largest community is the official Facebook group, which is around 3,900 users, more or less. I'm quite rude to the user that trying to post advertising and so on, so I removed the user very well, very often. And normally, this community is an English language, and is very collaborating, which the user collaborate between them. Then there is a very nice Brazilian community, which is Portuguese based language, and there is also a Spanish Telegram group to support all the Spanish speaking people. And there is also, it is not related to the MVC framework only, but there are a lot of users also in the Italian community, which is Delphi Club Italia, which we are all friends there, so we can talk about our stuff, and also I reply to the Delphi MC Framework questions.
Okay, cool. So I think we've touched on a few of these as we've gone through the conversation, but do you have anything else to add about how running an open source project has benefited you, in general?
Yes, I think that running open source projects is if you like it, is a really rewarding things. Not only, and probably not from the money related things. Say, if you want to make money, don't start to do an open source project, because maybe you do money in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years. It is not the fast way to do money, no, absolutely. But if you like to collaborate, experiment, try new stuff, just review things with other, it's invaluable, because the open source is really a way to collaborate between people, and you can use that open source to make custom project and makes actual money. But it's another things, and you can benefit from the framework, from the library, from what you do, because it is better. As I told, it's better than how it was without the other people working on it. So if you do a good project, you are the first, or I can say, you are the first that really benefits from it. Mm-hmm. The first that really benefits from it. It's not for all. It's not for all. Yes, I think that it's not for all, but it helps you as a person and as a technician.
Yeah. So I guess in terms of DMS container, which is obviously the microservice container example that's built on top of Delphi MVC as a whole, a new thing that then benefits from having that underlying infrastructure and architecture. Do you think you would have been able to get DMS container as it is today to market without having first done the Delphi MVC framework as an open source project?
Yeah, the MVC container, the DMS container is one of the projects born because Delphi MVC framework, and it's a commercial project with licenses, with all the stuff that run around a commercial project, but it is heavily based on Delphi MVC framework. And so the good things with the open source is that you can decide where the open source stuff terminates and when start the commercial part. Mm-hmm. And really a good level, because you can say, if I put the level too low, no one is interested in my open source project because it's a toy. If the level is too high, then probably I cannot get money. If my company is based on that, probably I need to find something else to get money for the company if the line is too high, because the revenue is low. But you can, it's a game which define the good part to be to have a gain for the other people that needs to use your open source software, and also for your company to stay alive.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
DNS container is the perfect example for it, because it is a brand new. It's not a brand new concept. It's a brand new packaging. Is a brand new product in the Delphi land, which provides this environment to fast development system. For example, last month, I think, there was a mechanism for a customer that I had a client server application, a classic client server application directly connected to database with all the classic DB grids and so on. That needs to open to the world to do some insight about what the user does in terms of offer services related to the action that is actually doing that, adding more information to the information available directly in the database. Using the MS container, we did it in a couple of 2 days, when normally was a job work for, I think, 3 weeks at least. And so it's benefits that come back to the company.
Mm-hmm.
And to the customer of that company.
Very good. Yeah, and I think there's a number of open source projects in the IT world as a whole that we look around. There's a number of databases out there now that are run as open source, but yet huge companies running around them. And it's always looking at the downstream complementary assets that help build and improve on that base product. As I say, getting that pitching of the level is absolutely right. And I know some databases might look at saying, okay, well, you can have the basic database, but if you need to have static on disk encryption at rest, then that's a level that you kind of pay in for some support. Or I know things like the open source version of Interbase with Firebird. There's companies who are basically just running support packages with a high cost for the support, and that's what you buy into. And then tools for doing kind of the connecting of the databases, or the management of them. So all these things that plug in around, and the clustering and all the other kind of extra bits that come through are where you can drive extra value through open source. But it's looking at that downstream position and what you can do with that is really where to look for those kind of things. Which is very cool.
Yes.
So I think you kind of touched on kind of key lessons that you've picked up, but any stories that you want to share around lessons that you've learned from doing this?
Yes, just a small one. Some people started to use Delphi MVC Framework as I was not imagining, and I start to learn something on how to use the framework from the people that are using it. So it's a lesson learned that you really cannot imagine how your user will use your software. Being a user interface driven is an user framework, use some units of code. So it's really stunning how the people can find a way to use something that was intended to be in a way, but it works also in another way that the original author just don't know. It's good.
Cool. And I know you've got a few other open source projects, and you mentioned a couple of bits. Obviously there's things like the Columbus egg for Delphi and things. So how's other open source projects that you have fit in with what you're doing here? And is it all kind of stemming from the fact that you have this, or are you finding that you're doing other things in open source because it actually just makes sense as well?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
So I was saying that you have obviously the Delphi ORM that you have. There's a Columbus Egg for Delphi. These are other open source projects that you've got implemented through. Do they fit into the Delphi MVC framework because there's things that you found over time that you need to have other things for helping test it and manage it, and it makes sense to split those into a separate project, or are they just other things that you have project-wise?
Oh, both. For example, Logger Pro and some other projects are that started because of Delphi MVC framework. But other project, no. For example, Columbus X for Delphi, which is a way to do, which is an architecture is an implemented for the table model design pattern, which allows to REST designed Delphi application to be unit tested, which is quite complicated. But I was for a consultancy to a customer that had a big project. It is not related to Delphi MC Framework in this case. This is, and they had a problem because they need to do testing because I'm changing here and broke here, changing here and broke here, because the dependencies are really complicated and intricate between it. And the Columbus Act for Delphi allows to see, just like the table model design pattern says, one view of data, anatomic one, anatomic things, just considering in isolation, and allows to save the RAD approach, which is one of the good part of Delphi, and use the unit testing when still using the RAD approach. So it's a tricks. It's called the Columbus Egg for Delphi because it's really something that just after you see it, you say, oh, it was so simple. Yes, it was so simple. Columbus Eggs for this reason.
Very, very cool. So, okay, brilliant. I've been really enjoying the chat today, Danielle. I'm just kind of conscious of the time a little bit. So here's some links for everybody for the Delphi MC Framework communities. If you're interested in getting into them, then I'll make sure the links are put up onto the blog along with the replay later today. To help, we've spoken about complementary assets, and one of the things Daniele spent quite a bit of time working on is a book to go along with the Delphi MVC framework. He's been kind enough to kind of put a 30% discount option up for the first 10 copies to go out in the different languages. So if you're interested in that, then please go ahead and have a look at that. And we can, let's just see if I can grab the link there and just pop that into the chat for the English one there.
This is the link of the book. The other one are the link with the coupon inside for the discount.
Okay. So do I need to put the other links in, or is it just the? If anybody needs the Spanish or the Portuguese link, then please shout, and I'll pop that into the into the chat. So, are there any other questions? If you want to unmute, please feel free. If you have any direct questions for Danielle, I know we've kind of covered quite a lot through the session today. Helga's put in here suggestions for an advanced book in chapters on using an IIS and Apache server. Okay, yeah, there are a couple of blog posts up around doing that. And I know if you speak German, there was a session that Matthias did last week going through setting up using IIS. With the Apache server side, then obviously there's some Docker instances, and in fact some of the RAD server stuff recently has been deployed out with Docker instances, and the scripts for those up in GitHub as well. And Danielle has mentioned that he's actually got something under construction ready for the IIS and Apache server. I think actually there's a blog post that you've already done a while back in terms of setting up on some of the web services, which is pretty useful. Okay. Just whilst any other questions are coming through, one piece of news that kind of broke through to me yesterday, that there's obviously we've got the Delphi 26th birthday coming up on the 14th. There is a competition that is being run through. There's the showcases section on the Embarcadero website, and there's a chance to win up to $3,000, and at the same time $10,000 worth of licenses for RAD Studio and Interface combined through. So if you have a look at it's case sensitive, but that bit.ly there, bit.ly TCoffeeWin. You can see there all the terms and conditions, how to submit your application in. Basically, once it's submitted in, you'll be able to get a link sent back to you, which you then just need to go share on Twitter. And whoever's getting the most likes and retweets is going to be looked as the winner. And the announcement, I think, is on the 17th of February. So definitely, we've seen or heard about some really cool case studies and stories today. If you have something really cool to share, then please go ahead and join in with that as well. So, Danielle, is there anything that you want to share before we close out here now?
No.
Nope. So, well, on behalf of everybody, let me say thank you ever so much for joining us today. It's been really, really interesting to hear from you and to get an insight to the kind of the work, the effort, the thought that goes into developing and bringing to market and continue to manage the largest Delphi contribution project on GitHub. And that's been very, very interesting. Hopefully, kind of the stuff that leads in some of the things that we've been speaking about today around testing and development is going to whet your appetite for tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to this session that Jens is going to be doing with us at the same time tomorrow. Thank you again for the questions and the chat coming through. I hope everybody found it useful. So yeah, thank you very much, Daniele. And
thank you.
See you all tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
See you. Bye-bye.